Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm going to do this little drawing of a frog in the moonlight, colored pencils on sanded paper. Let's start. So the frog is going to be sitting on a broken tree or a log or something, and it's going to be here in the lower right corner. So the first thing I'm going to do is sketch out the shape of the frog so that I can work around it. Don't ask me for a reference, there will be none, because this will be done mostly from scratch. So let's see how the scene is going to turn out. As for the materials, I'm mostly going to use Faber Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and I'm going to work on a 1000 grit waterproof sandpaper. I'm going to draw the moon here, and I did that in freehand. Hopefully it's going to look round enough. Now the background color, the color of my sandpaper, is already kind of bluish grey, but I want a slightly different tone of blue. And I'm actually going to use Kohinoor pastel pencil here to make this a little bit quicker. I also have the Faber Castell ultramarine colored pencil, which is similar in color, but this one is going to cover this large area a little bit more quickly. And because it's a pastel pencil, and because I'm going to blend it in with my finger like this, it won't really smudge much. And I'm also going to be working on top of that with a colored pencil, so I don't really have to worry about smudging or using too much of the fixative. Anyway, this is a quick way to cover a large area to establish that base color. I mean, I could do this with a colored pencil. I've done these things before, but this is a little bit quicker, maybe a little bit smoother. Now let's do the moon. So I'm going to use a couple slightly more reddish or pinkish tones around the edge, because I want a little bit of the warmer light around the edge. And I used a light beige red, and then inside of that I'm going to work with an ivory colored pencil, which is slightly warmer color than white, so it's like a yellowish white. I want to make it look like that moon is glowing. And then for the middle, I'm going to use a white colored pencil to make that middle portion brighter and cooler. And I need to cover that thoroughly. So hopefully it looks fairly round. I just need to soften the edges a little bit so that I can achieve that glowing effect, and so that there isn't any texture. I also worked a little bit with the ultramarine, or the light ultramarine colored pencil on top of the layer of Kohinoor pencil that I already put down, to fix some of the areas. And now I'm pretty much happy with the sky, so I can move on with some of the other elements. And first I'm going to draw a large tall tree on the left. So this scene is somewhat similar to a couple of other drawings I've done. This is actually a commissioned drawing, and I was given a lot of freedom in constructing this scene, but the idea is to have a moonlight scene with a frog. So it's going to be somewhat similar to some of the other drawings I've done, but it's going to be a little bit different. This part of the tree is going to be darker, which is facing away from that light source. So I used a black colored pencil there. I added a touch of brown here and there, but it's mostly going to be very dark. but the part of the tree which is facing the light source is going to be illuminated. It's going to be a lot lighter. So I need to use this lighter pencil on the edge of that tree trunk which is catching light from the light source. It's always important to stay aware and stay consistent with the light source, because that way your scene will not only look more realistic, it will also make sense. Now I'm drawing some branches and some foliage, because we're going to see a little bit of the canopy of that tree. I'm going to add a touch of other colors here, but I mostly want it to be fairly dark, because it's going to be creating a very nice contrast and tension against that lighter background. Not that the background is very light, but it's certainly lighter than this dark shadow side of the tree. I'm going to add a few more branches and clusters of needles here on the left, so that I can make it look like there are some more trees behind this one or next to this one, so that we can feel like we're looking at this moon from the edge of the forest or something. And just adding a touch of blue to the shadow side. So this part of the scene looks good. Now I'm going to add a few clouds. I want some darker clouds around this moon. For that I'm going to use dark indigo, which is like a really dark and fairly dull blue color, but really dark, and certainly better than using a black colored pencil. And I'm going to use that here on top of this ultramarine bluish background. I'm going to create some interesting shapes, hopefully, of clouds, and then I'm going to blend them in with a Tutillian, just a regular Tutillian, homemade Tutillian made from paper. Now, in order for this to work, you need to put down enough of the material. You need to put down enough of that darker blue color. Otherwise, when you start blending, you'll just be making the area lighter, or you'll be smudging it or spreading it too thin. So you need to make sure that you have enough of that darker color, so that these darker clouds would actually show up. And I also want some parts of those clouds to be going over the moon, or obscuring the moon partly. But because the moon is shining through them, those parts of the clouds are going to be a lot lighter. And I also want some parts of the clouds to be catching a little bit of the light from the moon, which is why I added a touch of that light beige around the edges of some clouds. So I thought that would be a nice touch. I'm adding some of these branches on the side of the tree trunk here and there. Some of them are broken off. And now I'm going to start working on the background, on the lower part of the background here, by drawing something like a slope in the background. And again, I'm going to use that dark indigo color, which worked really well with the clouds. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with that color that I picked. And I made it look like a wooden slope, like there are many trees in the distance. I blended that because I don't want any texture or illusion of detail there. I want it to look like it's far away, or much further away than this tree. And then on the right side I want some more trees. These are going to be a little bit further away than the one on the left, than the one in the foreground. So I'm going to obviously draw smaller shapes and less detailed trees. First I drew the vertical line, the vertical shape, and now I'm drawing the rest of the tree, the branches and the foliage. They're kind of growing out like this, and I just add a little bit of foliage here and there. It's supposed to be irregular and asymmetrical looking because that's going to make it look more realistic. And I'm just going to add a few more trees here and there, both to the left and to the right of that tree, so that it looks like a group of trees. Now here we're moving closer to the foreground area, and in order for that foreground area to stand out, and when I say the foreground area I mostly mean the frog and the log that it's going to be sitting on, I need to make sure that whatever is around it creates contrast in value. So I'm going to make this a lower right portion here darker, like it's almost all in the shadow. So I'm using a black colored pencil there. This slope here is going to be also mostly dark. Now I'm going to do a bit of blending with a brush. I use a soft synthetic brush, and I mostly use flat brushes. And I'm going to use that to blend these larger dark areas. For those of you who are new to these types of materials or to this technique, on sanded paper, colored pencils behave differently. They're easier to blend, easier to layer, and there's more residue to move around. So they behave a lot more like pastel pencils than they do like colored pencils. I added a few more distant mountains here, and I wanted a little bit more depth in that scene, and I wanted to fill in that light or empty area in the middle. So I thought that this was a good addition to the scene. Just a couple more slopes, a couple more mountains or mountain peaks, whatever they are. And I always make sure that the ones which are closer to us appear a little bit darker, so that they're kind of pushing the other elements back. So this slope is going to be darker than the ones behind it. And I also need them to be dark enough so that the frog and the other elements in the foreground would stand out. So it's always important to remember to create that contrast so that the shapes would stand out, and so that they would be easier to interpret for the viewer. I'm going to add a few lighter touches on this slope here, maybe a suggestion of a small path, some clumps of grass, some irregularities and variations in the terrain and the color and the shape of the terrain. But it's mostly going to be dark, because I don't want it to be too distracting. I want the frog to stand out, and I want it to be a little bit easier for the viewer to focus on the frog. Now for the frog, I'm going to use the same light color, that light beige red, that I used for the light side of the tree, to draw some of the edges of the frog's body which are catching light from that light source. And it is these lighter areas that will allow the frog to stand out against the background. So I hope I got the shape of the frog to look nice, because like I said, I didn't have a specific reference. I worked from a couple of different reference photos, and this one is loosely based on a peeper frog. I'm not gonna say this is going to look exactly the same like one of those, but similar colors, similar patterns, similar spots or stripes, whatever they are. But I'll get to that later. I just want to work a little bit on the color and on the shape, the general shape. I'm adding a little bit of brown, and I think this brownish color will stand out nicely against those bluish elements. But I will be adding some bluish shadowy tones on the frog as well. So I'm adding more and more detail to the frog and defining its anatomy better. trying to define individual body parts. Like now you can discern the shape of the hind legs and even the front legs a little bit. And the back is mostly going to be in the shadow or a little bit darker because it's facing away from the light source. So I think that the eye stands out nicely now because I have that darker spot for the eye, which I done with a black colored pencil, and I went around it with a lighter color, and now it feels like the eyes are bulging out. Just a few touches with a lighter pencil here and there to show that some parts of that frog's body are glistening in the moonlight and are catching light from the light source. In addition to the light beige red, I'm also going to use this cinnamon color pencil for some of the lighter parts of the body which are maybe not quite as light or quite as exposed to the light source. I'm going to add this X-like shape on the frog's back because that's more or less what peeper frogs look like. It's not always like a regular X. Sometimes these can be smaller interrupted shapes. And I'm going to add a touch of that dark indigo bluish color to the shadow side of the frog. I want the frog to be sitting on some kind of a broken tree or a branch or a log, wherever it is. So I'm going to draw a rough shape of a tree bark here, and it's going to be hollow on this side. So now I'm working with a black colored pencil to define those shadow areas and to add some of those larger cracks in that tree bark. And of course there's a lot of shadow behind the frog. The brush is making it easier for me to blend these large dark areas. With the cinnamon, I'm going to add some lighter areas on that tree bark, and I'm going to add a touch of brown as well. Even though the shadow side will mostly be bluish, I want to leave it like that. I added a touch of brown to the shadow area to the left as well. And now I'm just going to go in with a black color pencil and refine some of the edges and some of the smaller shapes, adding a little bit of texture, adding some detail like some cracks and stuff like that to make that surface of the tree bark and to make that tree log a little bit more interesting. For the edges which are exposed to the light source, again I'm going to use that light beige color so that they really stand out against the background, and you can see that I've achieved a very nice contrast. Now I'm just going to blur the rest of it and make it dark because I don't need every single part of the scene to be super well defined. There's a little bit of shadow here under the frog and behind it because the frog is casting a shadow onto that log. And now I'm just finishing this hollow area by adding a little bit more of the black colored pencil. The drawing is almost done. I'm gonna use this pinkish salmon color to put my signature in the lower left corner and add a little bit of that color around the edges of the light side of both the frog and that log. So it's a relatively simple scene. I think it's not very large. The size of the paper is around 5 times 8 inches or so. And like I said, the paper is a 1000 grit sandpaper. You can buy that in a hardware store. It works really well with colored pencils. Just adding a few of those pinkish tones here and there. If you want to see longer videos, full-length narrated videos and more content, you should check out my Patreon. Anyway, thanks for watching. Check out my other videos. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.